You think you know fear? You think you've seen nature at its most brutal? Forget apex predators. Forget the deepest oceans. What if I told you the true horror lurks beneath our feet? A silent, ravenous tide waiting for its moment. For months, strange things were happening in the forgotten corners of Mr. Henderson's backyard. Tools disappearing, faint clicking sounds in the dead of night, an unnerving stillness. He dismissed it as wildlife, maybe raccoons. But when his son's beloved pet rabbit vanished without a trace, a sense of dread, cold and sharp, began to truly set in. He installed a hidden camera, hoping to catch a local fox. What it captured, however, was something far more ancient, far more terrifying. Something that will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the natural world. This isn't just a discovery. It's a chilling warning, a glimpse into an unstoppable force. The footage you're about to see isn't for the faint of heart. It reveals an invasion, a relentless, brutal assault by creatures thought to be mere insects, but acting with the precision and ferocity of a well-drilled army. You'll witness their raw, destructive power, their terrifying intelligence. Trust me, after this, you'll never look at a tiny ant the same way again. Watch until the end to discover the horrifying truth. You think you know fear. You think you've seen nature at its most brutal. Forget apex predators. Forget the deepest oceans. What if I told you the true horror lurks beneath our feet? A silent, ravenous tide waiting for its moment. For months, strange things were happening in the forgotten corners of Mr. Henderson's backyard. Tools disappearing, faint clicking sounds in the dead of night, an unnerving stillness. He dismissed it as wildlife, maybe raccoons. But when his son's beloved pet rabbit vanished without a trace, a sense of dread, cold and sharp, began to truly set in. He installed a hidden camera, hoping to catch a local fox. What it captured, however, was something far more ancient, far more terrifying. Something that will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the natural world. This isn't just a discovery. It's a chilling warning, a glimpse into an unstoppable force. The footage you're about to see isn't for the faint of heart. It reveals an invasion, a relentless, brutal assault by creatures thought to be mere insects, but acting with the precision and ferocity of a well-drilled army. You'll witness their raw, destructive power, their terrifying intelligence. Trust me, after this, you'll never look at a tiny ant the same way again. Watch until the end to discover the horrifying truth. Arthur Henderson, a man whose life revolved around the precise cut of his lawn and the convivial clinking of teacups during his Sunday garden parties, was a creature of habit. His patch of suburban bliss, a neat semi-detached house on Willow Creek Lane, was his sanctuary. But lately, a subtle dissonance had begun to chip away at its placid veneer. It started innocuously enough, a missing hand trowel, perhaps misplaced beneath a rose bush. Then his favorite pruning shears, the German-made ones, simply vanished from their hook in the garden shed. Must be the neighbor's kids again, he'd grumbled to his reflection in the kitchen window, though he knew deep down the Miller's brood were far too well behaved for such mischief. The incidents escalated. A bag of potting mix, left open for an hour, had inexplicably emptied itself onto the paved patio. His trusty spirit level, gone. The faint scratching and rustling, like dry leaves skittering across concrete, began to emanate from the overgrown corner of his shed. Particularly after dusk, he'd often pause his evening cuppa, straining his ears against the suburban hum, convinced he could hear something else. A rhythmic, almost mechanical click-click. He blamed rats, naturally, because what else could it be? This was England, not the Amazon. He set traps, bought industrial-strength poison, but the sounds persisted, a ghostly percussion section in the twilight. His 11-year-old son, Jamie, was distraught one Tuesday morning. "Dad, Barnaby's gone." Arthur rushed out, heart sinking, to find the hutch door ajar. Barnaby, Jamie's fluffy, lop-eared rabbit, a gift from his grandmother, was nowhere to be seen. There were no telltale tufts of fur, no overturned water bowl, no frantic claw marks against the wood. The cage was simply empty. It was too clean, too silent. A cold, sterile quiet had replaced Barnaby's usual sleepy sniffing. "A fox, son," Arthur said, trying to inject certainty into his voice, pulling Jamie into a tight hug. "They're clever devils, foxes." But his eyes darted around the immaculately clean hutch floor, searching for any sign of struggle, any confirmation of a natural predator. There was nothing. That night, sleep offered no refuge. The image of the empty hutch haunted him. The rational part of his brain screamed, "Fox." But a cold, gnawing anxiety suggested something else entirely. Something methodical. Something patient. He paced the living room, a mug of lukewarm tea forgotten in his hand. He needed answers. He needed proof. He needed to restore order to his quiet, predictable world. By dawn, his resolve was set. He bought a motion-activated security camera, a discreet little contraption he could mount high on the shed. He'd catch the culprit, whatever it was. A sly fox, a mischievous badger, maybe even one of those pesky urban squirrels getting too bold. He meticulously positioned it, aiming its lens at the precise spot where Barnaby's hutch had stood, and across the patch of overgrown weeds leading to the darker recesses beneath the shed. He just wanted to understand, to put an end to the creeping unease. He had no idea, not the slightest inkling, that the mundane footage he expected to capture would instead open a window onto a horror far older and more alien than anything he could possibly imagine. He pressed record, oblivious to the relentless, silent invasion poised to reveal itself. The digital clock on the old VCR glowed, 2:17 a.m., a stark green against the inky black of Mr. Henderson's den. He nursed a lukewarm mug of builder's tea, the kind so strong it could dissolve a spoon, though it did little to dissolve the exhaustion clinging to him like a damp shroud. His eyes, gritty from too many hours staring at screens and worrying, were fixed on the television. The hidden camera, a discreet little contraption had ordered from Amazon, had delivered its first night's worth of footage. He'd fast-forwarded through hours of swaying bushes, the relentless drip of the neighbor's leaky tap, and the occasional ghostly shimmer of a spiderweb catching the moonlight. His initial hope, a faint flicker, was for a fox, a culprit he could understand, a narrative that made sense. A fox? A raccoon? Even a badger would explain the vanishing tools, the faint, unnerving clicks, and most heartbreakingly, young Billy's beloved rabbit, Thumper. Then, something shifted. A shadow, not quite right, flickered at the very edge of the frame, near the old stone bird bath. He fumbled for the remote, his thumb pressing rewind with a jerky urgency. The grainy footage stuttered backwards, then played again at normal speed. There! Another shadow, then another, a dark, creeping ripple across the lawn. His breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. It wasn't a single creature, or even two. It was a multitude, a low-lying current, flowing with an unsettling fluid motion. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed, straining to resolve the indistinct shapes. What he saw next snapped his tired mind wide awake, a jolt of ice-cold dread shooting down his spine. It wasn't a stream of water, nor was it a shadow trick of the light. It was a column, a living, undulating column of ants. But these were no ordinary garden ants, the kind you'd flick away with a casual boot. These were gargantuan, each one the size of his thumbnail, their dark carapaces glinting faintly in the infrared. They moved with an impossible speed, a relentless, focused energy that felt wrong. He watched, mesmerized and repulsed, as the leading edge of the column reached a patch of overgrown weeds near the fence line. Instead of going around, they began to systematically dismantle it. Tiny, serrated mandibles, visible even in the low resolution, clipped stalks, dragged away leaves, and tunneled beneath tangled roots. Their precision was chilling, a terrifying choreography of destruction. They weren't merely moving through the garden, they were clearing it, methodically, purposefully. A wave of primal fear, ancient and irrational, washed over Mr. Henderson. This wasn't just pest control territory anymore. This was something entirely monstrously different. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the den. "What in the blazes?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible even to himself. He replayed the sequence, his eyes wide, tracing the path of the advancing army. They moved like a well-drilled unit, an organized force, each one a miniature battering ram, a living cog in a terrifying machine. The size, the speed, the sheer, unnerving intelligence of their movements. It was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He felt a sickening lurch as the implication finally sank in, a dreadful whisper in the back of his mind. Thumper. The rabbit. Could it have been them? The thought was grotesque, unbelievable, yet the footage, stark and undeniable, was right there. He stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. What in God's name was he truly dealing with, lurking beneath the familiar soil of his own backyard? He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his understanding of the natural world had just shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. This wasn't just a bug problem. This was an invasion. You think you've seen the worst of it? You've only scratched the surface, my friends. After that initial, chilling glimpse, Mr. Henderson felt a cold certainty settle in his bones, heavier than any autumn fog. He knew, with an instinct as ancient as fear itself, that the rabbit wasn't merely gone. It had been taken, and the culprits weren't the foxes or badgers he'd initially hoped for. No, they were something far more insidious, something that moved with a sinister purpose. He spent the following days in a haze, the mundane tasks of his life feeling utterly irrelevant in the face of this growing dread. His wife, bless her heart, tried to coax him out for a walk along the village green, but his mind remained tethered to the little camouflaged camera nestled amongst the overgrown clematis. He replayed the footage countless times, scrutinizing every pixel, every shadow. The faint clicking sounds, previously dismissed as leaf litter or creaking wood, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent rhythm in his memory. He'd even bought a stronger spotlight, but what good was light against an enemy that thrived in the dark, that moved in legions? Finally, the internal pressure became too much. He couldn't just wait for something else to vanish. He swapped out the SD card, heart hammering a frantic jig against his ribs, and hurried inside to the sanctity of his study. A mug of lukewarm tea sat forgotten on his oak desk, a testament to his distraction. He clicked open the video file, the cursor hovering like a nervous bird before a storm. What unfolded next wasn't just a revelation. It was a gut punch. The footage began innocently enough, just the usual rustling of leaves in the dappled moonlight, a cricket chirping its repetitive tune. Then, a small field mouse, a creature of exquisite fragility, darted into view. Its whiskers twitched, sniffing at a discarded seed near the base of the old apple tree. It was tiny, brown, and utterly unaware of the abyss about to swallow it whole. Suddenly, a flicker, a movement at the edge of the frame. Then another and another. They weren't scurrying randomly. They were streaming. A dark, glistening ribbon unspooled from beneath a loose paving slab, fanning out with terrifying speed. Hundreds, then thousands of them, each one the size of his thumb, their chitinous bodies reflecting the faint moonlight. The mouse froze, its little nose quivering, sensing the shift in the air, the sudden oppressive presence. It let out a tiny squeak, a pathetic plea lost in the vastness of the night. Before it could even twitch its tail and escape, the first wave hit. Not a chaotic scramble, no. It was a coordinated assault. They didn't just bite. They swarmed, a living, undulating carpet of ravenous mandibles and legs. The camera, bless its silent, unblinking eye, captured it all with brutal clarity. The mouse's desperate thrashing, a frantic blur of fur and terror, lasted mere seconds. It was utterly, horrifyingly overwhelmed. They climbed over each other, a dark, pulsing wave, until the small rodent was completely engulfed, a writhing, struggling mound beneath their mass. There was no sound from the mouse anymore, just the sickening crunching, a collective, efficient dismantling that made Mr. Henderson gag. He watched, utterly transfixed, as limbs were torn, flesh stripped away with astonishing speed and precision. The raw, primal efficiency was breathtaking and utterly monstrous. In minutes, what had been a living creature was reduced to fragments. Bits of bone, sinew, and fur, already being carried away by individual ants, disappearing into the dark maw beneath the paving slab. It was clinical. It was terrifying. Mr. Henderson stumbled back from the screen, knocking over his forgotten tea. The lukewarm liquid spread across his desk, but he barely noticed. His heart was trying to claw its way out of his chest, and his breath hitched in his throat. "Bloody hell," he whispered, the words rasping. "Bloody hell." This wasn't just an infestation. This wasn't nature's messy cycle. This was an army. An intelligent, relentless, and utterly unstoppable force. And it was in his backyard. The question wasn't if they would come for him, but when. You think you know fear? You think you've seen nature at its most brutal? Forget apex predators. Forget the deepest oceans. What if I told you the true horror lurks beneath our feet? A silent, ravenous tide, waiting for its moment. For months, strange things were happening in the forgotten corners of Mr. Henderson's backyard. Tools disappearing. Faint clicking sounds in the dead of night. An unnerving stillness. He dismissed it as wildlife, maybe raccoons. But when his son's beloved pet rabbit vanished without a trace, a sense of dread, cold and sharp, began to truly set in. He installed a hidden camera, hoping to catch a local fox. What it captured, however, was something far more ancient, far more terrifying. Something that will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the natural world. This isn't just a discovery. It's a chilling warning, a glimpse into an unstoppable force. The footage you're about to see isn't for the faint of heart. It reveals an invasion, a relentless, brutal assault by creatures thought to be mere insects, but acting with the precision and ferocity of a well-drilled army. You'll witness their raw, destructive power, their terrifying intelligence. Trust me, after this, you'll never look at a tiny ant the same way again. Watch until the end to discover the horrifying truth. The first rays of dawn, thin and hesitant, crept over the Henderson property, illuminating a scene that defied belief. Where yesterday had been a lush, if slightly overgrown, garden, now stretched a desolate expanse of barren earth. Not a single blade of grass remained. No leaf, no stray petal, not even a stubborn weed dared to pierce the uniformly denuded soil. It was clean, impossibly so, as if a colossal, invisible rake had systematically scoured the ground, leaving behind only the rich, dark loam, flattened and unsettlingly smooth. Mr. Henderson stood at his back door, a mug of now cold tea trembling in his grip, his breath fogging in the crisp morning air. The faint metallic tang of disturbed earth hung heavy, a scent that prickled the back of his throat. He squinted, trying to reconcile the stark reality before him with his own memory, his own sanity. "It's just gone," he murmured, the words feeling foreign, inadequate. His gaze swept over the precise, almost surgical lines where his garden had met the untouched asphalt of the driveway. The concrete was pristine, but the soil beyond it bare. Utterly, terrifyingly bare. A shiver snaked down his spine, not from the chill, but from the unnerving absence of anything. This wasn't mere destruction. It was erasure. "Mr. Henderson, you all right?" The voice, wavering and thin, belonged to Mrs. Gable, his elderly neighbor, standing nervously at the shared fence line, her eyes wide with a similar, dawning horror. Her prize-winning petunias, a vibrant riot of purples and pinks that usually cascaded from hanging baskets on her porch, were also gone. Just the empty, bone-dry baskets swayed gently in the breeze. "Mrs. Gable," Mr. Henderson managed, his voice a gravelly whisper. Do you see this?" She nodded slowly, a single tear tracking a path through the dust on her cheek. "My roses, Gerald, my prize-winning, blushing beauties, vanished. Just like they were never there." She pointed a trembling finger towards a patch of ground where, yesterday, an ancient oak had cast its generous shade. Now, only a gnawed, splintered stump remained, the wood stripped to its core. Not a single fallen leaf or twig anywhere near it. "The ants," he breathed, the word a poison on his tongue. He remembered the footage, the frenzied, chitinous tide, the sheer, unimaginable numbers. They had been an army, an unstoppable, living wave of ravenous precision. But this was beyond mere consumption. This was an act of complete, systematic annihilation. His mind reeled, grappling with the implication. These weren't just insects seeking sustenance. These were creatures of terrifying intelligence, of immense coordinated power. What else could they do? What other secrets did the Earth hold? The comfortable, familiar world he knew, where nature was largely contained, had just been ripped apart at the seam. What if this wasn't an isolated incident? What if they were everywhere, beneath cities, under oceans? A hidden kingdom waiting, biding its time. The thought settled in his gut, like a block of ice. A profound sense of vulnerability washed over him. A chilling awareness that humanity, for all its perceived dominance, was but a fragile construct perched atop an ancient, unforgiving power. We dig, we build, we pave over, all the while assuming we control the ground beneath our feet. But what if the true masters are already there, just watching, just waiting? This isn't just Mr. Henderson's story. It's a chilling warning for all of us. It forces us to ask, what else don't we see? What other hidden forces are at play, patiently enduring, patiently growing, until they're ready to remind us just how small and insignificant we really are? The world is far wilder, far more brutal than we dare to imagine. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones we've always dismissed as harmless. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe for more content.